The year was 1865, and winter had not come kindly to the frontier. The wind cut like a knife across the open plains, rattling the bare cottonwoods and sweeping the drifts into white walls that rose higher with every hour. Against that relentless storm, a widow stumbled through the snow, her shawl pulled tight, though it did little to keep the frost from seeping into her bones. Clara McAllister had been walking since dawn, her boots soaked, her breath ragged, and now her knees buckled beneath her. She pitched forward into the drift, the lantern slipping from her hand and dimming against the flurry. "Ma!" cried a boy's voice. Daniel, barely 10, knelt beside her, his cheeks raw with windburn. His younger sister, Ruth, clutched his arm, her small body shaking with cold. The storm howled around them, drowning out all but the desperation in their voices. Clara tried to rise, tried to reassure them, but her body refused. The weight of hunger, grief, and winter itself dragged her down. She closed her eyes, ready to surrender to the snow. But Daniel, stubborn as his late father, lifted the lantern high. Its weak flame flickered in the gale, a pale defiance against the dark. He shouted into the void, though the wind stole half his words. "Somebody, help us!" The prairie answered with silence, until the crunch of hooves broke through. A shadow moved on the horizon, blurred by snow but steady in its approach. Ruth gasped, clutching her brother tighter. Daniel raised the lantern higher, his thin arm trembling under its weight. The rider came closer, the shape resolving into a man on a black horse. He rode, with the ease of one long accustomed to the saddle, shoulders broad, hat brim low against the storm. A long coat flapped with each gust, and the glint of metal hung at his hip. He drew rein at the sight of the family, dismounted in one fluid motion, and crouched beside Clara. His face was lean, weathered by years of sun and smoke. A scar tugged across his jaw, half hidden by stubble. His eyes, gray, watchful, took in Clara's pallor, the children's trembling forms, the flickering lantern. Without a word, he slid an arm beneath Clara's shoulders, lifting her with surprising care. "Stay back," Daniel warned, his voice cracking, though he clutched his sister as if he might shield her from the man's shadow. The stranger's gaze flicked toward the boy. "She won't last long out here." His voice was rough, low, like gravel stirred by the wind. "Do you want her dead?" Daniel's defiance faltered. Ruth began to cry, small sobs lost in the storm. The man adjusted Clara's weight and, without waiting for permission, carried her to his horse. He set her across the saddle and swung up behind her, steadying her limp form. He looked down at the children. "Get up!" Fear warred with desperation in their eyes, but the cold gave them no choice. Daniel hoisted Ruth, then climbed after her. The man spurred the horse forward, and the beast lunged into the storm. They rode in silence, the only sounds the hiss of wind and the steady beat of hooves. Clara drifted in and out of consciousness, her head resting against the stranger's chest. Daniel held the lantern tight, its glow bouncing weakly against the snow. Time stretched, indistinct, until at last a darker shape loomed through the gale, an abandoned trading post, its timbers sagging but still standing against the storm. The rider dismounted, carried Clara inside, and laid her near the hearth where ashes still lingered. Daniel and Ruth followed, stamping their frozen feet. The stranger moved with quiet efficiency. He tore down broken shelves for kindling, sparked flint to steel, and soon a thin flame caught. Smoke curled upward, chased by warmth that spread across the ruined room. Clara stirred, groaning softly. Her eyes opened to the firelight, and she saw him properly for the first time. The lines on his face spoke of battles fought and losses carried. His coat smelled of leather and smoke. She tried to speak, but he lifted a hand. "Rest. You've pushed too far." "Who are you?" Daniel demanded, though his teeth chattered. The man glanced at him, then back to the fire. "Elias. That's all you need know." Ruth edged closer to her mother, staring at Elias with wide eyes. Clara forced herself up on an elbow. "Why are you helping us?" Elias didn't answer. He pulled a blanket from his saddlebag, draped it over her shoulders, then returned to tend the fire. The silence stretched until Daniel, bold again, muttered, Maybe he's a bandit. Elias didn't look up. If I was, you'd be dead already. The words silenced the boy. Clara laid a hand on her son's arm, whispering, "Hush!" Yet her own suspicion gnawed at her. She knew the frontier's kindness was rare, and a man who appeared out of a storm with guns at his hip was seldom a saint. Still, exhaustion overruled doubt. She let her eyes drift closed, trusting the fire, if not the man. Elias kept watch. His gaze lingered on the woman's gaunt face, the children's thin frames. Hunger clung to them as clearly as frost. He reached for a pouch, tossed dried meat onto the stones near the fire. Daniel hesitated, but hunger won. He snatched it, tore it in half, and gave a piece to Ruth. Their chewing was loud in the silence. When the children slept, Clara stirred again. She forced herself upright, shivering as she pulled the blanket closer. "I didn't ask for your help," she said, her voice rough. "You didn't have to." Elias leaned against the wall, revolver across his knee. His gray eyes studied the flames. Clara swallowed hard. She thought of her husband, John, who had died in the mine only months before, crushed under timber when the company cut corners. His death left her with 2 children and debts she couldn't pay. Neighbors had turned their faces away. Judge Rourke, the land baron who owned half the valley, had sent his men to her door, demanding she sell her homestead. When she refused, they'd come again, harder, until she'd fled with her children into the snow. She had told no one. Yet, as she sat watching Elias, she wondered if he already knew. Men like him usually did. Her breath caught as a sound rose outside, a low growl, the crunch of snow beneath paws. Elias was on his feet. In an instant, gun raised. The children woke with a start. A wolf's silhouette passed across the cracked window. Clara's heart hammered. Another growl, closer. Then a snarl. The horse outside screamed. Elias threw the door open and fired. The blast shook the walls. A yelp cut the night, then silence. Snow swirled through the doorway before he kicked it shut. "Wolves," he muttered, holstering his gun. He crouched, scanning the darkness through the window. "More'll come." Daniel's eyes were wide. "You killed it." "Better the wolf than your throats," Elias said flatly. He checked the door latch, then returned to his post. Clara clutched her children tight, fear mingling with something else, relief. The fire crackled. Outside, the wind wailed like the mourners at a graveside. Elias sat silent, his shadow long on the wall. Clara watched him, exhaustion tugging at her, but unease keeping her alert. She wanted to demand his purpose, to send him away. Yet something in his bearing stilled her tongue. He was not here by accident. That much she knew. At last, her body betrayed her. Her eyes grew heavy. Before sleep claimed her, she whispered, "Why us?" Elias did not answer. He only adjusted the revolver on his knee and kept his gaze on the dark window. The night dragged on. Snow fell heavier, burying tracks, smothering sound. Wolves circled but did not return. Within the trading post, 3 breaths rose and fell in restless dreams, while one man kept watch, his eyes never leaving the shadows. A lantern had been lifted against the storm, and from the darkness a gunslinger had come. Some would call it fate. Others would call it trouble. In the West, the difference was often the same. Clara dreamed of her husband's voice, of debts unpaid and threats unspoken. When she woke, she would remember the scarred man who sat by the fire, silent and unyielding. She would wonder if he was salvation or merely another danger, riding the endless frontier. But for now, in that fragile moment, warmth flickered where there had been only cold, and the night held its breath, waiting for dawn. The storm had broken by morning, though the sky still hung low and gray, the kind of ceiling that pressed down on a man's spirit as much as on the land. Clara woke to the sound of steel scraping stone. Elias sat by the fire, his revolver in hand, running a whetstone along the edge of a hunting knife. Sparks of light danced briefly before vanishing. He worked with quiet concentration, as if the rhythm itself held him steady. Daniel was the first of the children to stir. He sat up, rubbing his eyes, and stared openly at the gunslinger. The boy's voice cracked when he spoke. "You a killer?" Elias paused, blade held still in his hand. For a long moment he didn't answer, and Clara, still gathering her senses, thought he would ignore the question. Then he sheathed the knife and spoke without looking up. "That's not something you ask if you're not ready for the truth." Daniel swallowed hard. He didn't press. Ruth rolled over and buried her face against her mother, whimpering. Clara hushed her, though her own unease lingered. She studied the man across the room. His movements, his silence, his scar, all told her he was a man made dangerous by life. Yet her children had not frozen to death in the night, and that mattered more than her fears. They ate what little remained of Elias's provisions, and then he rose, pulling on his gloves. "We can't stay," he said. "This place won't keep the cold or the wolves at bay another night." Clara bristled. "And where do you mean to take us? You don't even know us." Elias met her gaze. "I know you'll die out here if I don't." He slung his rifle across his back and opened the door. The cold slapped in, sharp and bitter. "Pack what you've got. We ride." They had almost nothing to pack, just a shawl, a lantern, a child's doll, and the stubborn will to live. Clara helped Ruth onto the horse while Elias lifted Daniel up behind. Then he steadied Clara, though she stiffened at his touch. When all were mounted, he spurred the horse forward. The prairie stretched white and endless. Snow crunched under the hooves, breaking the silence. The sun glared weakly through shifting clouds. Clara pulled the shawl over Ruth, shielding her as best she could, while Daniel craned his neck to watch Elias. "Why do you carry 2 guns?" the boy asked after a time. Elias did not glance back. "Because one's never enough." It was the first hint of a lesson, and Daniel held on to it like a secret. By midday, they reached a shallow valley where the snow thinned against stone ridges. Elias dismounted, studying the ground. He crouched low, fingers brushing prints in the drift. "Deer passed through here," he murmured. Then he rose and pointed toward a canyon where the wind funneled sharp. "We follow the river down. Might find shelter." They moved on, the children shivering against their mother. Clara's strength was nearly spent, but she pressed forward, unwilling to show weakness before the stranger. Her mind drifted to the homestead she had left behind, small, weathered boards that John had built with his own hands. She could almost hear the hammer strikes, the laughter of neighbors in better days. Now it lay behind her, claimed by men who served Rourke. The thought made her chest tighten. She glanced at Elias. Did he know the name? Did he know the weight of it? That afternoon, as the canyon walls closed in around them, Daniel slipped from the saddle when they stopped to rest. Elias crouched beside him, pointing at tracks in the snow. "See that? Rabbit. Small prints. Quick. Don't step on them if you mean to learn." Daniel nodded, eyes wide with attention. Clara watched, surprised. A man of violence teaching her boy the quiet language of the land. It unsettled her, yet stirred something else she could not name. But peace was short-lived. A faint sound rose through the canyon. Hooves, many of them, muffled by distance. Elias stiffened, his hand drifting toward his revolver. Clara's heart lurched. "Riders," he whispered. "Too many for chance." He seized the reins and led them off the path, guiding the horse into a narrow cut between boulders. The canyon shadows swallowed them. He pressed a finger to his lips. Daniel clutched Ruth tight, his lantern dark to avoid drawing notice. Clara held her breath. The riders came into view. 5 men, their horses steaming in the cold. They wore thick coats, rifles slung, and hard expressions that told of work done for coin rather than conscience. Clara recognized the brand on one saddle, Rourke's crest. Her stomach clenched. She dared not move. The men passed, voices carrying in fragments through the wind. "Search the valley. She's out here, somewhere. Judge wants her found." One rider slowed, scanning the snow. His eyes narrowed. He leaned down, spotting the faint marks where Elias's horse had crossed. Elias moved like a shadow. He slipped his knife free, crouched low, and vanished into the drift. Clara wanted to cry out, but bit her tongue until it bled. A muffled grunt. Then silence. The rider slumped forward, throat cut, his body slipping soundlessly from the saddle. The other horses snorted, but their riders pressed on, unaware. Elias dragged the corpse behind a boulder, his hands steady, his eyes flat as stone. When he returned, Clara could not meet his gaze. She had known he was dangerous, but to see him kill without hesitation, without even the sound of a shot, shook her. Daniel's eyes were wide, fixed on Elias as though he were both savior and monster. They waited until the riders faded. Then Elias spoke. "They'll keep searching. We move fast." They pressed on until the canyon widened into a stretch of barren land. By nightfall, they reached a cluster of rocks where Elias built a small fire, carefully hidden from the open plain. Clara sat close to the children, the flames casting long shadows across her tired face. At last she asked the question that had burned in her since dawn. "Why are you helping us?" Elias sat opposite, staring into the fire. For a long time he did not answer. The crackle of flames filled the silence. Then slowly he spoke. "Because once I was on the other side." Clara frowned. "The other side of what?" "I rode for men like Rourke, did their work, collected debts, cleared land, made folk disappear. I was good at it." His voice was steady, but something behind it cracked. "Too good." Daniel stared at him, firelight dancing in his eyes. "So, why'd you stop?" Elias shifted, the scar on his jaw catching the glow. "Because I killed someone who wasn't meant to die. A boy no older than you. Wrong place, wrong time. After that, I put my gun down." "But you still carry it," Clara whispered. He met her gaze. "Because there are worse men than me still riding." The words hung heavy in the air. Clara wanted to despise him. Yet she saw in his eyes the weight of guilt that never left. He was a man running from his own past, and somehow they had become his penance. The fire burned low. The children dozed, heads against their mother. Clara lingered awake, watching Elias as he kept vigil. She wondered if she could trust him, wondered if she had any choice. The night passed uneasy. Before dawn, Elias doused the fire and urged them onward. The plains stretched bleak beneath a pale sky. The wind carried faint sounds, distant hooves again. Clara tightened her grip on Ruth's shoulders. Elias rode, with his head low, listening, every sense alert. By midday, the sound grew clearer. Rourke's men were behind them, closing the distance. Elias cursed under his breath, scanning the land. Ahead lay a frozen river, wide and treacherous, its surface cracked and shifting under the weight of ice. "We cross," he said. Clara's heart pounded. "It won't hold." Better to chance the river than wait for the noose. Elias spurred the horse forward, urging them onto the ice. The surface groaned beneath the weight. Cracks spidered outward. Clara clutched her children, whispering prayers. Halfway across, a shot rang out. The crack echoed like thunder. Ice splintered near their feet. Ruth screamed. Daniel clutched her tight, his eyes wide with terror. Elias jerked his head. "Down." Another shot whistled past, sparking against stone. Rourke's riders had reached the far bank, rifles raised. Elias drew his revolver, firing back in sharp, measured bursts. Each shot cracked the morning stillness. One rider toppled, horse screaming. Another wheeled away, wounded. Clara felt the horse beneath her slipping, hooves scrambling for grip. The ice groaned, buckled, then gave. A section shattered, water surging up. The horse lunged forward, barely finding footing. Cold spray stung Clara's face. She clutched Ruth, dragging her higher. Daniel cried out, reaching for the lantern that slipped from his grip. Elias fired again, driving the riders back. Then he wheeled the horse and urged it across, pushing harder until, with a final lurch, they reached the far bank. He dismounted instantly, hauling Clara and the children to solid ground. Behind them, the ice shifted and collapsed, swallowing broken shards. The river's current carried them away, erasing their trail. Breathing hard, Elias glanced back at the riders. Only 3 remained, stranded on the far side, shouting curses as the river tore their path away. He holstered his gun and turned to Clara. "They won't stop. Not until they're dead, or I am." Clara's chest heaved, her shawl soaked through. She met his gaze, fear warring with gratitude. The truth lay plain before her now. Elias was not simply a wanderer. He was a weapon aimed at Rourke, and somehow she and her children had been caught in the line of fire. The children huddled close, lantern clutched between them. The flame inside still burned, though faint, trembling against the wind. Clara wrapped her arms around them, her voice low. "Then we move, before the dark takes us." Elias nodded once. He turned his face toward the horizon, eyes hard, as if he could already see the battle waiting. The frontier stretched endless before them, white and merciless. But behind, the hoofbeats of Judge Rourke's men echoed like the drumbeat of war. And so they pressed on, bound together by necessity, shadows of past sins and present dangers riding close at their backs. The fire of conflict had been struck, and it would burn hotter yet before it was through. The sun never rose bright that morning. It hung weak in a colorless sky, a pale coin behind thin clouds. The land stretched endless and white, broken only by the skeletons of cottonwoods clawing upward through the frost. Clara rode in silence, her children pressed close against her sides, while Elias led the horse across the frozen ground. His eyes never rested. They cut from horizon to tree line to riverbed and back again, always searching, always wary. By the time they reached the abandoned mining camp, the day was already dying. Cabins sagged under snow, their roofs caved, windows hollow, like skulls left in the dust. A broken hoist jutted from the earth, rope dangling like a noose, swaying faintly in the wind. Clara drew Ruth closer, whispering comfort the child scarcely heard. Daniel stared wide-eyed at the ruins, imagination alive with ghosts of men who once dug silver from these hills. Elias led them to the largest of the shacks, its door hanging crooked. He shoved it open with a shoulder and motioned them inside. The place smelled of rust and rot, but it was four walls, a roof, and shelter from wind. He built a small fire in the corner, his movements quick and practiced, though his gaze kept flicking back to the open door. Clara's voice was little more than a whisper. "They'll find us, won't they?" Elias didn't answer right away. He struck flint to steel until the spark caught, then said, "Men like Rourke don't let go. If he's after you, it'll end here or not at all." Her throat tightened. She wanted to ask why. Why her family? Why her land? But the answer already sat heavy in her chest. Rourke wanted control, and the homestead John left her was the last patch of ground he didn't own. He'd sent men to scare her, then to break her. When she refused, they'd driven her into the storm. Now she looked at the scarred gunslinger across from her, a man who carried death like another tool in his saddlebag. Perhaps fate had chosen him as her last shield, or perhaps fate was crueler than that, and he would only deliver them to more sorrow. The children huddled near the fire. Daniel leaned forward, the lantern set between his knees, flame bright against the gloom. He looked up at Elias, his young face hardening. "You'll fight them, won't you?" Elias met the boy's gaze. "I'll do what I have to." Night fell fast. Shadows thickened in the broken rafters, the cold seeping back in despite the fire. It was then the first sound came, a distant echo of hooves carrying over the frozen earth like a drumbeat. Clara stiffened. Ruth whimpered. Daniel clutched the lantern as though its little glow could keep the darkness at bay. Elias rose, checked his revolvers, and moved to the door. His voice was calm, almost flat. "They're here." The hoofbeats drew closer, joined by the clink of bridles and the sharp laugh of men who knew their prey was cornered. Clara pressed her children against her skirts, heart hammering so loud she feared it would betray them. Torches flared outside, orange light dancing across the snow. 6 riders surrounded the camp, their horses stamping, breath steaming. At their head rode Judge Rourke himself, wrapped in a heavy coat trimmed with fur, his broad face set in a cruel smile. His voice carried over the night. "Clara McAllister," he boomed, "you've run long enough. Time to come out and settle this like decent folk." Clara's blood chilled. She had heard that voice before, had felt its weight when he sent men to her door. She stayed silent, clutching Ruth tighter. Elias stepped into the doorway, revolvers loose in his hands, posture relaxed yet coiled like a spring. "She's not yours to claim, Rourke." The judge laughed loud and sharp. "And who in hell are you to say otherwise? Just another drifter with a gun and no cause." Elias's tone did not waver. "Maybe, but tonight I'm the line you won't cross." The men around Rourke muttered, shifting uneasily in their saddles. They recognized Elias, his face, his reputation. The scarred gunslinger who'd once ridden for blood and coin. If he stood against them, there would be no easy victory. Rourke sneered. "Kill him. Leave the woman breathing. The land's mine by sunrise." The first shot cracked the air. Torches wavered. Horses screamed. Elias moved before the echo faded, his revolver bucking in his hand. One rider pitched backward off his saddle, blood spraying across the snow. Another clutched his shoulder, dropping his torch as his horse bolted into the dark. Chaos broke loose. Gunfire lit the night in flashes. The children screamed. Clara dragged them to the far corner, shielding them with her body. Bullets tore splinters from the cabin walls. The lantern on the floor rattled with each thunderclap of gunfire. Elias stepped into the open, fearless, moving with the deadly rhythm of a man who had lived too long with death at his side. His shots were quick, precise. Each pull of the trigger dropped another man until the snow outside was stained with dark patches. Rourke himself dismounted, rifle in hand, his face twisted with rage. "You think one man can stop me?" he bellowed. He leveled the weapon at the shack, firing wild, which shattered, smoke filling the air. Clara cried out as fragments struck her arm. Daniel seized the rifle propped in the corner, hands trembling. He turned to his mother. "I can help." "No," Clara snapped, grabbing him. But Elias's voice cut through, sharp and steady. "Give him cover." It was madness, yet Clara saw no other path. She braced the rifle, aimed with hands that shook, and fired into the night. The shot missed wide, but it startled the attackers, bought Elias the heartbeat he needed. He lunged from the shadows, guns blazing, cutting down two more riders before they could return fire. Rourke roared, drawing a pistol and advancing. His eyes locked on Clara inside the shack. "You think you can defy me? I own this valley. I own everything." Elias strode forward, both guns empty now. He holstered them slow, deliberate, and drew his knife instead. "Not tonight, you don't." The two men closed the distance, the world narrowing to their duel. Rourke swung wild with the pistol, but catching Elias across the temple. Blood streaked his face, but Elias didn't falter. He drove the knife forward, slashing Rourke's coat, grazing his ribs. They grappled, slipping on the ice-slick ground, grunting, straining. Clara watched, heart pounding, unable to move, unable to breathe. The children clung to her skirts, eyes wide. Rourke managed to shove Elias back, raised his pistol, and fired. The shot struck Elias high, in the chest. He staggered, knife falling from his grip. Clara cried out, rising to her feet. But Elias did not fall. He surged forward with a final burst of strength, slamming into Rourke, grappling the pistol away, and turning it back on him. The muzzle pressed against the judge's chest. "You'll hurt no one else," Elias rasped. Then he fired. The shot echoed through the camp, louder than all the rest. Rourke stumbled back, eyes wide, blood blooming against his coat. He fell into the snow, torchlight flickering over his lifeless face. Silence followed. The last rider fled into the dark, his courage broken. Only the crackle of fire and the ragged breath of the living remained. Elias swayed, hand pressed his wound. He turned back, toward the shack, toward Clara and the children. His steps were slow, heavy. Clara rushed to him, catching his arm as he sank to his knees. Blood soaked his shirt, steaming in the cold. His gray eyes met hers, steady despite the pain. "It's done," he whispered. "You're safe now." "No," Clara pleaded, pressing her hand to his wound. "Stay with us." "You can't." Elias shook his head, faintly. "I was never meant to stay. My life's been a debt I couldn't pay. But tonight, maybe I paid some." His gaze shifted to Daniel and Ruth, who clung to their mother, tears streaking their faces. They'll need someone strong. You'll be that. He reached to his belt, drew his revolver, and placed it in Clara's hands. His voice was barely a breath. Not just a weapon. A promise. Keep them safe. Clara's vision blurred with tears. She gripped his hand around the revolver. I will. I swear it. Elias gave a faint smile, the first she had seen. Then his strength left him, and he slumped forward, lifeless, the scar on his face softening in death. Clara knelt in the snow beside him, her sobs muffled against the wind. Daniel lowered the lantern, flame flickering against the fallen man. Ruth buried her face in her mother's shawl, whispering through tears, "He saved us, Ma." They buried him at dawn beneath a lone cottonwood by the river, the snow falling soft around the grave. Clara said, no words, there were none strong enough. But in her heart, she carried the weight of his sacrifice, the strange gift of hope he had left behind. When they turned to leave, Daniel carried the lantern, its flame burning steady despite the cold. Clara walked beside him, Ruth's hand in hers. Ahead lay hardship, hunger, the endless struggle of the frontier. But something else, too, a strength she had not known she carried, lit by a stranger's final stand. The narrator's voice lingered over the frozen valley. Some men leave only blood behind, others a legacy. And sometimes, in the harshest land, a scarred gunslinger can ride from the dark and change the fate of a family. Clara looked back, once, toward the mound beneath the cottonwood. Then she set her face to the horizon, lantern light guiding their way. What do we take from this tale? The voice asked low and reflective. Maybe it's this? The frontier wasn't just a place, but a test of will. Some failed it, some conquered it, and a rare few gave their lives, so others might endure. The lantern glowed brighter against the dim morning. Clara's breath clouded the air as she whispered to her children, "We keep moving." And so they did, their small figures carrying the light across the endless snow into a future that, for the first time in months, felt like it might belong to them.